Hello everyone! Welcome back to another episode of Alex the Explainer. In today's episode, it's actually the second episode of Relationships in Nature. And in this episode, we'll be tackling a different type of relationship in nature. Rather than a symbiotic relationship, it will be a colony relationship, where a bunch of animals in the same species have a relationship with each other, as in they're really social. In this case, we're tackling ant colonies. First, what are ants anyways? Well, ants don't really need any introduction, okay? They're small little animals. They actually descended from wasps, so they're related to wasps quite closely. And they're, everywhere, really. On the ground, you can see them in your room, maybe. And they're actually pretty interesting. And they actually don't just live alone. They actually live in these big groups called colonies. It all starts with a single egg from an ant colony. All eggs are the same. However, if they're fed properly by the worker ants, they'll become something different. There'll be worker ants who work around the colony, soldier ants who protect the colony from any outside forces. Finally, there's actually the queen, which is the biggest ant of them all, and it lays all the eggs. No real ant is actually the leader. They're all collectively working for the survival of the colony, like one big superorganism. These types of insects are called eusocial insects, similar to maybe beehives or even wasp nests. But in terms of ants, that's a whole other story. They have very different looking cast members of the same species, and they're basically a hive mind, a single organism trying to survive. That's what makes ants really interesting. It's kind of a mirror of our own species, as we are also a certain type of society, much like the ants. Pretty interesting. However, back to the eggs. Once an egg is laid, it will then hatch into a larva. They cannot move or do anything really, they can just eat. So, they're fed by the worker ants. If it's fed enough, it can become an elate, a young queen. Or, if it's during mating season, the larva can also become a male ant. Then the larva will go through its pupal stage. Then it will spin a cocoon and wrap itself around the cocoon and change into the adult form in there. Or it could not even spin a cocoon at all, be what's called a naked pupa, maybe because there's a lot of protection for that ant. Eventually, though, it will reach adulthood and it will become either a male or a late ant. Or it could also become the workers, soldiers, and majors. But in terms of the mating season, a lot of elates and male ants will be born. And they're actually born with wings. And they'll go out and fly out to search for a mate. This is what's called a nuptial flight. Eventually, if an elate finds another male ant from a different colony, they can mate with that ant. And eventually, if an elate can find an area to start a colony in, and it can lay its first batch of eggs, which eventually will become workers. Eventually it will lay soldiers and many other different types. And eventually, a true ant colony will be born. There are many different types of ants. There are the carpenter ants, who live in wood and eat wood. There are the weaver ants, which actually live in kind of a leaf basket, where they use the larva's silk as kind of like glue to glue this whole leaf basket together. And that's where the colony lives. Pretty interesting. Or there could also be a leaf cutter ants. These are very interesting. You see, a lot of people think that when a leaf cutter ants cut leaves and bring them back to the colony, they just eat the leaves. However, they actually feed it to fungus. They have various growing fungus gardens in the colony, and they feed those leaves to the fungus. And so, the ants can eat the fungus. This is a type of mutualistic symbiotic relationship, where both the fungus and the ants are benefited by their symbiotic relationship. There are also bullet ants, which are larger than regular ants, and they have a massive stinger that can sting, and it can hurt like a bullet. But there is also army ants, which the soldiers have massive jaws and are able to perfectly protect the colony. These ants are also well known to move their colonies around. Whenever they use up the resources in one area, they can just move to another area, and so on and so forth. I actually caught a footage of this actually going down with a different type of ant in my actual backyard. Take a look. amazing to think that you can move such a large amount of creatures to another spot. Pretty interesting. However, the most well-known type of ant are, by far, the fire ants. Okay, these creatures are a menace. Usually, they are well known to live in areas like South America or those places, but they've actually been introduced to areas like Africa, Europe, North America, and they're a pretty big nuisance. They're actually an invasive species, which isn't really good. And also, they can defend their colonies very well. The soldier ants, they sting pretty bad. It happened to me pretty bad. However, some fire ants, when the rainy season comes or the wet season comes in the Amazon rainforest, they can actually build a raft. They have all the ants, and they all act like a raft. They're all floating across the water as basically a massive boat to keep the colony alive even during the wet season. Eventually, they'll find land to walk on, and they can walk back on land. But for the time being, they are kind of like a boat. And they even have like a pocket of water where they can be still breathing even when fully submerged. So, it's pretty interesting how invincible ants are, even when suffering a massive flood, like the ones in the Amazon rainforest. Ants are truly incredible. In conclusion, ants, pretty cool. And so guys, bye guys, and stay Shrektastic.